Alright, YouTube, it's time to talk about the concept of guilt. Specifically, white guilt is really what concerns us when we're talking about the modern era. Now, I'm going to say this, and like my videos on feminism or on white privilege, I'm sure that there will be people that disagree with me, but I look at individuals as what they are, individuals. Not saying colorblindness, but people are people essentially, and individuals' choices, their actions, their decisions, their beliefs really is what makes them them. When you start grouping people into these homogenized units, these categories, whether there's a hierarchy there or not, whether it's separate but equal, or whether you're saying sort of a master and servant situation, these are variously done. Social science tends to teach, in the modern sense, this is what they would say in an academic setting, they teach that whenever there is a situation when people are split apart by gender, race, class, whatever it happens to be, the general notion is that when this is done, in any scenario where there's sort of dogmatism, there's legalism going on. It's a legal system, a political system, a social system, something that's sort of like unspoken but agreed upon by a culture. They would say that the attempt being made is really not so much to differentiate and categorize just for their own sake, but is rather to create a group that is privileged and a group that is subservient. When I hear about people saying that whites should feel guilty for and then insert ill here, whether it's segregation, colonialism, slavery, all whites should feel sorry for other groups simply because there happen to be whites that are racist. When I hear that, all I hear is them categorizing white people the same way that they perceive whites as categorizing other groups. And I would note that this term white that they typically use to denote this myth of privilege that they perpetuate, or this idea of guilt that they encourage, the same category that they use there, they then will turn around and call a social construct. And they appear at the moment, this is fairly new actually, it sort of comes in the last couple of years essentially, the concept of white that is used by groups that would be loosely termed culturally Marxist or left progressive or anything along those lines. The category of white that they are using has morphed from specifically individuals, generally male, although not exclusively, generally Christian, although not exclusively, but almost exclusively whites of specifically European origin. That is, somebody's family is in or from Scandinavia, Britain, Ireland, Germany, or France, someplace like that. That was the category of white that was typically used. Now, for some purposes, East Asians, specifically people from Japan or Korea, certain Arab or, people from the rest of Europe that would have before been considered, they won't use this actual term because that would be being too honest, I guess, with the people they claim to be helping, but they would call them darker people, somebody with black hair and brown eyes rather than some blonde-haired, blue-eyed German. They've begun to drag these groups in as well as Hispanics, specifically from Latin America, not talking about, somebody from Spain or something like that. But people who happen to be light-skinned and not a first-generation immigrant to the United States or elsewhere from someplace like Mexico or Brazil or Argentina are now being lumped together as well in this group, which they then say, and this is honest, they will say it's a social construct. But then at the same time, regardless that it's a social construct at all, which is what they're claiming, they then claim that these individuals have something to feel guilty for. Looking at people as individuals, and looking at myself as an individual, I say I will judge another person based solely on their own decisions, their beliefs, the things that they say, the things that they do, the things that they believe in, the choices they make. That is the essence of what makes them truly them as a unique individual. It has nothing to do with, well, they've got more melanin in their skin. or they come from such and such a country, or their hair color is not the same as mine, because these are rather small brow things to judge somebody on. But these same groups that spawn this white privilege, white guilt sort of stuff, then will turn around and they have no problem with categorizing people as being, homogenous, as long as they are applying that, homogenous nature essentially to their own envisionment of white rather than some other group. If somebody were white and they said, well, all blacks are, or all blacks should feel, or all blacks should like, or all blacks should eat, or insert something else here that all blacks supposedly are supposed to be doing, some uniting feature behind blackness, those people would say that's racist. But they will then turn around and say, well, all whites need to feel guilty for segregation. It's the same exact thing. Now, looking at myself again, as a libertarian, I tend to look at people as individuals. I really don't care about their other affiliations or their race or whatever. However, looking at people as individuals is superior. Looking at people as individuals allows you to make judgments about them that are going to be accurate. The idea of stereotyping and bigotry and all this stuff is now equally being done by the left and right, and the left is just more hypocritical about it. Everybody knows that somebody like Ted Cruz probably isn't inviting the NBA over for dinner. We all know that. But what about somebody like Al Sharpton? It's a totally separate issue. They'll look at the Ku Klux Klan and they'll say the Ku Klux Klan's racist, but they won't apply the same logic to the Black Panthers. Then they'll say that it has something to do with suppression. Now, as an individual, have I ever owned slaves? The answer is no. Have I ever existed in a segregated society? No. Was I alive during either of these things? Or was I alive during colonialism? No. Would I have supported these things? No. Has there ever been a time in my state when slavery was legal? No. My state outlawed it centuries ago, actually before it was actually a state. I have never supported slavery or owned slaves. I've never supported segregation or taken part in segregation or beaten down freedom riders or any of these things. I don't go to Klan rallies or Nazi Party rallies or anything like that. So what would I have to feel guilty for? The fact that my great-great-great-great-great-granduncle, 400 years ago might have had a slave does not cause me to feel guilt at all, because I am not the same individual. I am my own individual, my own choices, my own decisions and beliefs. That is what matters insofar as my life goes. The behavior of somebody that came before me who just happens to be related means nothing. Their decisions do not affect my life. They're dead. They're not even alive anymore. They're a corpse in the ground. Whatever they did during their life is between them and the grave. It has no bearing on modern society whatsoever. It doesn't affect me, and it doesn't affect those around me. The fact that you may have had some ancestor that owned a slave, or an ancestor who was pro-segregation, or an ancestor that was a colonial-era immigrant to the New World who killed a Native American brave or something, that does not affect you. You did not take part in those things any more than any of the people alive in Africa today, with exceptions, I suppose, in some areas, it depends on the area, takes part in rounding people up and selling them to a bunch of colonists from Europe. Any more than modern-day North Africans go down into sub-Saharan Africa to, knock out random black people and sell them across the Atlantic Ocean. Any more than a modern-day Brazilian, because let's remember Brazil was the country that absorbed the most slaves of all, any more than they, in the modern sense, continue to absorb slaves from Africa. The sins of the past are just that. They are in the past. The idea that we need to feel sorry collectively, even though none of us actually had part in these things, I think is bogus. That would be the same, by the way, as saying that these same cultural Marxists, by taking part in the ideologies that they do, should somehow pay reparations for the Holodomor or something. Well, you weren't alive when it happened. There may be a few people who are extremely old and have Alzheimer's by now, but you didn't participate in it. You didn't have any part in it. You couldn't have stopped it, so why should you feel sorry for it? The idea of collectively grouping people together, even by nation. The same left that does this for the purposes of saying people should feel guilty then is taken aback if you consider yourself part of one of these groups for any other purpose. If a person were to say, well, I'm an American and proud, that would probably rankle one of these people. They'd say, why should you have pride simply because of how you were born? By the way, I would agree with you on that. I think it's fine to be proud of one's country, and thus the endeavor should be to improve it and make it better, not simply pride for pride's sake. Two totally different issues. So yeah, I mean, they're kind of right about that. But at the same time, they will then say that it is good that a person should say, oh, well, I'm an American and so I feel sorry for the Native American genocide. See, you've got two situations. In both situations, in each one, people are being grouped together by nationality, race. It doesn't really matter how they're being grouped together, religion, political ideology or whatever. In one case, the person is told they're not supposed to feel proud of something, but on the other hand, they're supposed to, as a member of that same collective group, which supposedly is artificial, and this cultural Marxist will point this out when they're going the other way, they should feel guilty. They shouldn't have white pride, because that's evil, racist, despicable, and means you're a Nazi who wants to kill every minority on Earth somehow. But you should feel guilty for being part of this same artificial group. You shouldn't feel good about being straight, but you should feel guilty for being straight. In both cases, the category remains the same. The supposedly artificially constructed category is thus being used by these individuals who admittedly are a minority of the left. And that's something people need to understand. This is like maybe 10% of all the people who would actually self-proclaim themselves leftists. And most of them are very bored individuals indeed, just like a very small proportion of the right wing actually are like Klan members or Nazis or something. They would say that these categories are artificially constructed and largely used to impart power to a group that is put in the dominant position there. They have taken the same categories, and this is the same concept as with privilege. They took the same categories, the same utterly arbitrary categories as they would term them, and simply turned them on their heads. It's a rather dishonest thing to do, rather than actually thinking in a revolutionary manner and saying, well, why do we have these categories at all? Instead of doing that, they have instead simply inverted these categories and attempted to reverse their meaning. It's really rather simple-minded. You don't have to be particularly intelligent to take an existing system and simply turn it on its head, give it a new meaning, and reapply it to other people. And then these individuals don't appear to understand why people reject their ideas, even though the same ideas that they are using are, again, those inverted ideas that are simply from like the segregation era or something, or they're from the Civil War period. They take the categories that they have proclaimed artificial, that people who largely were white Christian males made, and they simply turned them on their heads to give them a new meaning. Well, how is this intellectual? How is it a revolutionary concept? It's been done time and time again. In fact, it's basically meaningless. In reality, and this is really what civil rights leaders were fighting for, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and all these others largely simply wanted people to be considered equal and to be treated equally. Well, that's not the same ethos that these same so-called civil warriors in the New Age are doing. This is actually the opposite of what they're doing. The social justice warrior movement, instead of trying to cause people to think of themselves as equals, or to do away with these categories so people just refer to one another as fellow human beings and largely get along and aren't bigoted shitheads. Instead of doing that, they have retained the categories. In fact, they have strengthened them. All they have done is reverse the meaning. So no, if somebody says that I should feel guilty for some Native American that died 400 years ago, or for slavery or segregation or something, I'm going to say, of course I don't feel guilty. I wasn't a part of them. I wasn't able to stop them. I wasn't in support of them because I was not alive at the time that they happened. I'm not old enough to have taken part in any of these things. Segregation went the way of the dinosaur several decades before I was born. Slavery was a dead issue before anybody that I know was born. There are no people left alive in this world today who remember that period where the United States had slavery. And by the way, this is just an issue largely dominant in Europe and the United States. What about slavery that goes on to this day in a place like Haiti, or in parts of Africa, or in the Arab world, or in parts of Asia? There are millions and millions of slaves in China alone. Where is the outcry over the modern day actual issue of this is still going on and has nothing whatsoever to do even with people that fall into the same supposed artificial construct that the left itself indulges in, which is whiteness? Where's the outcry over the millions, probably tens of millions of slaves that are in the world today? And we're not talking about just, oh, well, yeah, I was enslaved and worked half to death on a cane plantation. This is sexual slavery. This is the trade in human organs. Somebody is abducted, their organs are harvested, basically, and then, their remains, the rest of them is basically thrown in a dumpster or something. This goes far beyond simply the idea of using people as physical labor, and has become something arguably even more hideous in the modern sense, actually happening as we speak now. There are enough slaves probably to equal the population of my own state many times over in the world actually right now today, and nobody seems to have a problem with it. They would much rather focus on something that happened 150 years ago. And say that I should feel guilty for that, or you should feel guilty for that, or Joe Schmo over there should feel guilty for that. Well, I don't own slaves. I don't, my bathroom is not segregated. Why would I feel guilty for these things? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. The categories have remained the same. It's just as insidious. It's just as wrong. These people should know better. If they had any critical thinking skills, they would understand this concept, and they would also see how what they are suggesting is almost diametrically opposed to what civil rights leaders in the 50s or 60s were actually talking about. In fact, it really has a lot more in common with separatists on both sides. Somebody like a Klan member from the 50s or a Black Panther from the 50s has much more in common with that sort of rhetoric than from people like Martin Luther King that largely were not interested in separation. They were simply interested in being left alone to live their lives and be judged based on the quality of their character, as he said, rather than the color of their skin. But these same cultural Marxists would look at me, see me as white, presumably, and they would say that I should feel guilt or that I have some special privilege by virtue of being white. Sorry, I'm just not seeing that. Sounds a lot like those same supposedly artificial categories you just got through in the prior paragraph, saying we're artificial, should be done away with, and are horrible, and were perpetuated by, evil straight white male Christians. Well, I have the straight white male part, but I don't have the Christian part. I guess I have 3/4 privilege on that one. But no, I mean, the ideology behind it uses the same exact antiquated categories as the worst eugenics era sort of way of thinking. I don't see how this is a revolutionary concept. Really, it seems just like a knockoff, an inversion of those same failed beliefs. So yeah, I don't feel guilty for slavery or segregation or any of this stuff. I don't feel guilty for the fact that gays are denied marriage either, because I've always supported gay marriage. I don't have a problem with it. It's legal in my state. If some redneck from Alabama doesn't like gay people, that's not my fault. That's the redneck from Alabama's fault. They're an individual possessed of their own volition. They made the choice to believe in such things. I did not. It goes without saying, I am my own unique, sovereign, sentient individual. I make my own choices, I have my own beliefs. The result of those choices I make, the result of my beliefs, that's my responsibility. If I do something wrong and feel guilty about it, that's because I did something wrong. Not because somebody else did, either in the past or in the present, because that's not me. I am a totally different individual. So I would like people to ponder that. if you want to look at people as individuals, it seems a little more sensible than looking at them as, oh, well, yeah, you're white, therefore you've done something wrong, or you're black, therefore gang member, or you're Asian, therefore good at math. All of these stereotypes are exactly the same. The only difference being the predominant white stereotype among these same individuals that believe race is a social construct yet still use race as a categorization system is that whites should feel guilty. They have done something heinous simply by existing. I don't see it that way. That's about all. Peace out.